The city never truly slept. From the 43rd floor, Lagos glittered like spilled diamonds across black velvet, towers of glass catching light, highways threading through the dark like veins, carrying the pulse of a world that never stopped moving. It was the kind of view that made people feel powerful just by standing in front of it. Zuri Han had stood in front of it 1,000 times. Tonight, she stood in front of it alone, holding a glass of red wine she hadn't touched, wearing a silk robe the color of midnight, and listening to the silence of a penthouse that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. She wasn't waiting for anything, or so she told herself. The phone buzzed on the marble counter. She almost didn't look. She almost let it go to voicemail, the way she had learned to let so many things go. Quietly, without ceremony, without asking too many questions. But something made her turn. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the particular way the screen lit up, against the dark kitchen, casting a pale glow like a warning sign. She set down her wine, walked over, and looked at the name on the screen. Jae-hyun. Except it wasn't Jae-hyun calling. It was someone calling him. His phone, the one he had left on the counter when he stepped into the shower, was vibrating with an incoming call from a contact, saved simply as S. Zuri stared at it for 3 full seconds. She picked it up. She answered. The voice on the other end was soft, practiced. The kind of soft that wasn't natural but had been deliberately cultivated. Warm at the edges, confident at the center. The voice of a woman who was very used to getting exactly what she wanted. "Baby, I've been waiting all evening. When are you coming? I made dinner." Zuri said nothing. She stood perfectly still, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone. The voice continued, undeterred, unaware, floating through the speaker with casual intimacy that felt like a blade sliding slowly between ribs. "I need to know about the timeline. You promised me this quarter, Jae-hyun. When will you finally divorce her? You said after the merger. The merger is almost here. So when?" The silence stretched. Then, from behind Zuri, the bathroom door opened. Han Jae-hyun stepped out in a towel, steam still curling from the doorframe, running one hand through his wet hair. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that magazine covers had called magnetic and commanding. He had built a technology and investment empire from what everyone called nothing, though Zuri knew better than anyone that it had never been nothing. He crossed the room toward the kitchen without looking up, and then he stopped. He saw Zuri. He saw the phone in her hand. He saw his own name on the screen. For a single moment, one crystalline, irreversible moment, every carefully constructed layer of the man she had loved for 11 years cracked directly down the center. She watched it happen. She watched the calculation move behind his eyes, the rapid assessment, the pivot. He didn't reach for the phone. He didn't apologize. He stood very still, watching her the way a man watches a situation he is not yet sure he can control. Zuri looked at him. Then she lifted the phone back to her ear. "He'll call you back," she said. Calm. Flat. Absolute. She ended the call, set the phone on the counter, picked up her wine glass, took a slow sip. "Zuri," he started. "Don't," she said. Not loudly, not with tears in her voice, just the single word, clean and final, like a door clicking shut. "Not tonight, Jae-hyun. I'm tired." She walked to the bedroom. She closed the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, the city still glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she breathed. In. Out. In. Out. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere in the last few years, to hold pain at a certain distance, to observe it rather than be consumed by it. What more she felt in that moment wasn't grief. It was something colder and more clarifying. was the feeling of a question she had been asking herself for years, finally receiving its answer. Of course, she thought. Of course. She had met Han Jae-hyun 12 years ago at a financial strategy conference in Singapore. She had been 28, sharp-tongued, and fiercely intelligent, working as a senior analyst at a mid-size investment firm. He had been 30, the founder of a tech startup that showed extraordinary promise and almost no operational discipline. He had approached her after her panel presentation with the particular confidence of a man who was used to rooms turning toward him, and he had said, "You're the only person in that room who actually understood what you were talking about." She had laughed. She had told him that was a low bar. He had said, "Which is exactly why I need someone like you." It had started professionally. She had helped him restructure his early investor agreements, build financial models that could actually survive due diligence, and navigate a regulatory landscape that had almost buried the company in its second year. She had worked 18-hour days for months. She had sacrificed 2 other career opportunities to see his vision through. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, somewhere in the late nights and the small victories and the shared language of 2 people building something from the ground up, she had fallen in love with him. Or perhaps she had fallen in love with who she believed he was becoming. They married quietly, 3 years in. No grand ceremony, just a small gathering of people who actually mattered, a dinner that went until 3 in the morning, and a feeling in her chest that she had, for the first time in her life, chosen correctly. For years, she was right. They were partners in every real sense of the word. She designed the legal architecture of the company's holding structures, frameworks that were, critically, tied to her early filings and authorizations. She built the relationships with the board. She identified the acquisitions that would define his empire. She sat beside him at investor dinners and said the right things and wore the right expressions and watched him receive standing ovations for ideas they had built together in their kitchen at midnight. She had not minded. She had told herself she did not mind. What she had done, without fully realizing it, was make herself indispensable to everything and invisible to everyone. The public saw Han Jae-hyun as a singular genius, a visionary, a self-made titan. They saw Zuri as his elegant, composed wife, the woman who appeared beside him at galas and said gracious things to journalists and looked like she belonged in the background of his story. No one talked about the financial restructuring she had executed in 2019 that kept the company from collapse. No one wrote features about the investor relationship she had, personally salvaged after a near-catastrophic board split. No one gave her credit for anything because she had never asked for it. And she had never asked for it because she had believed, fully, faithfully, that it didn't matter who received the credit as long as they were building it together. That belief, she now understood, had been the most expensive thing she had ever purchased. Sitting in the dark of her bedroom, Zuri pulled her knees to her chest and let herself replay every red flag she had buried. The late-night meetings that produced no meeting notes and left no calendar traces. The new phone he had acquired 18 months ago kept on silent, always in his jacket pocket. The way he had begun including her lesson strategy conversations, offering thin explanations she had accepted because she was busy, because she was tired, because she trusted him. The weekend conference in Dubai 4 months ago, where she had called his hotel room at 11 at night, and no one had picked up. She had told herself there were explanations. She had chosen to believe the explanations she invented. She would not invent any more. By morning, Jae-hyun had left early for the office, leaving behind a note that said simply, "We should talk when you're ready." Zuri read it twice, tore it into 4 pieces, and dropped it in the bin. She showered, dressed in a charcoal blazer and tailored trousers, made herself a coffee, and sat at her private desk in the corner of the home office with her laptop open and a very particular kind of focus settling over her like armor. She was not going to cry. She was not going to confront him. She was not going to do what a woman in her position was expected to do: collapse, plead, negotiate from weakness, or demand answers that would only produce practiced lies. She was going to think. If he could lie this well, she said quietly to herself, I can think better. She began with what she knew. The company, Han Global Strategic Holdings, was structured across 7 legal entities spanning 4 jurisdictions. She had helped design that structure. She knew it the way a surgeon knows an anatomy. Every artery, every nerve, every point of vulnerability. She opened the internal financial management system using her authorization credentials, which she had maintained out of habit long after her official involvement had quietly been deprioritized by Jae Hyun's newer team. The credentials still worked. That was the first thing that told her something important. Whoever was managing his legal affairs had been careless. They had not audited her access. They had assumed she was passive. They had assumed, as Jae Hyun clearly had, that she was predictable. That a composed, loyal woman who stood quietly at her husband's side was also a woman who would not look too closely at the machinery behind the walls. They had made a fundamental error. She spent 3 days going through the financials with the methodical patience of someone who had spent a career in this exact kind of work. What she found made her set down her coffee cup and sit back in her chair, with her hands very still in her lap. There were fund allocations that didn't correspond to any operational line item she recognized. Transfers, not enormous individually, but consistent, patterned, structured in a way that was designed to avoid triggering automatic compliance flags. Luxury expenses categorized under client entertainment that bore no client names, tied instead to a secondary identity she found buried in the 4th entity's accounts. A lifestyle account in the name of Yoo Se-rin. She searched the name. Yoo Se-rin was 31 years old, a socialite, influencer, and creative entrepreneur, the kind of title that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Her social media presence was carefully curated. Fashion, travel, exclusive events, always tagged in locations that said, I have arrived. She had appeared in the background of 3 separate event photographs tied to Jae Hyun's corporate calendar over the past 18 months. In 2 of them, she stood close enough that it would have been visible to anyone paying attention. Zuri had not been paying attention. She was paying attention now. She found the Dubai expense report, a suite at the Burj Al Arab, charged to the company's hospitality account under a client code that resolved back to a shell identity. 2 occupants, 4 nights. She closed the laptop. She stood up. She walked to the window, looked out at the city, breathed slowly, and made a decision. She would not confront him. Confrontation was for people who still needed confirmation. She had confirmation. What she needed now was something else entirely. She called her personal attorney, a woman named Adaiza, who had been her private legal advisor for 6 years, and who was, critically, not connected in any professional capacity to Han Global Strategic Holdings. I need a full audit of my legal standing in the company's founding documents, Zuri said. Specifically, I need to know every authorization point, every co-ownership structure, every approval mechanism where my signature or authority is embedded. I need it within 72 hours. A pause. Zuri, is everything? 72 hours, Adaize. Understood. She next called Kwame Osebonsu, a board member who had known her longer than he had known Ja Hyun, who had, in fact, been introduced to Ja Hyun through her. Kwame was 63, methodical, deeply private, and possessed of the rare quality of caring more about institutional soundness than personal allegiance. Kwame, she said, I need to have a conversation with you about the merger authorization structure, not through the official channels. Personally. Another pause, longer this time. Then, when? Tomorrow evening, somewhere quiet. My home office, 7 o'clock. Meanwhile, less than 4 kilometers away, in the executive floor of the Han Global Tower, Jae-hyun was having a very different kind of conversation. "You promised me," said the voice on the other end of the phone. Yoo Se-rin. Her softness had sharpened since last night, the warmth replaced with an edge she didn't bother to conceal. "She answered your phone, Jae-hyun. She knows. She doesn't know anything specific. She heard a voice. She's not going to do anything dramatic. That's not how Zuri operates." "How can you be so calm about this?" "Because I know her," he said, with the particular confidence of a man who had confused familiarity with understanding. "She'll be hurt. She'll pull away. She'll handle it the way she handles everything, quietly, privately, and without making a scene. By the time the merger closes, I'll manage the conversation and we can move forward the way we planned." "And if she doesn't? What if she won't," Jae-hyun said. "Zuri is a planner. She thinks everything through. She would never act impulsively, and she would never do anything that could damage what we built together. She's too invested in the company to burn it. She's invested in you. There's a difference." "Same thing," he said, then added more gently, "Trust me, I know exactly what she will and won't do." He was wrong, of course, but he wouldn't know that for another 3 weeks. The meeting with Kwame lasted 2.5 hours. Zuri arrived with printed documents, annotated summaries, and the kind of focused composure that Kwame later described to a colleague as the most controlled person I have ever watched think in real time. She did not ask him to choose sides. She did not frame it in emotional terms. She laid out, with clinical precision, the legal architecture of the company's foundation, showing him exactly where her authority was embedded, exactly what required her authorization to proceed, and exactly what was at risk if the merger's execution hit a structural obstacle. Kwame was quiet for a long time after she finished. "You're not asking me to block it," he said finally. It was not a question. "I'm asking you to understand the full picture," Zuri replied. "And then I'm asking you to make decisions based on that understanding, whatever those decisions are." "How many board members have you spoken to?" "You're the first." "Who else will you approach?" she told him. He listened. He folded his hands on the desk, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then looked back at her with the expression of a man who had just redrawn a very important map in his head. "I've always thought," he said quietly, "that this company's greatest structural asset was never properly credited." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "It wasn't." Over the next 2 weeks, Zuri moved with the patience and precision of someone who had decided the stakes were too high for anything less than perfection. She worked in the early mornings before Jae-hyun woke, and in the late evenings after he returned to their penthouse with the tired, distracted energy of a man too absorbed in his own priorities to notice the weather changing around him. She was never cold to him. She was never warm either. She was simply present, available, composed, going through the motions of a life she had already mentally departed, while her hands worked quietly and efficiently at the architecture of what came next. She revalidated her position as co-authorizing signatory on the company's 3 core holding structures, a status that had never been formally revoked, only quietly deprioritized. She filed updated documentation with the relevant regulatory bodies. She secured digital access to 2 critical operational accounts using credentials she had legitimately never surrendered. She worked with Adois on a patent review that revealed something extraordinary. 14 of the company's most commercially valuable intellectual property filings bore her name as co-inventor, a detail that had been buried in the foundational paperwork, but had never been legally transferred or reassigned. Those patents were worth, in rough current valuation, somewhere between $800 million and $1.2 billion. She also, during this period, encountered Yusa Rin in person for the first time. It happened at a charity gala hosted by one of the company's strategic partners, the kind of event that Zuri attended out of obligation and navigated with practiced ease. She was standing near the bar with a glass of champagne, listening to a foundation director describe a new education initiative when she became aware of someone watching her. She turned slightly. Yusa Rin was across the room, younger than Zuri had imagined, and more beautiful in a specific, deliberate way, the kind of beauty that required significant effort to appear effortless. She was wearing a dress that cost money she did not earn, and standing next to a man who was trying too hard to appear relevant to her. But her eyes were on Zuri, and there was something in them, a calculation, a curiosity, and just below the surface, a peculiar defiance that told Zuri she was being measured. Zuri met her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned back to the foundation director and said, "That's a remarkable initiative. Tell me more about the secondary school component." She did not look back. Later, she heard from a source that Se-Rin had told someone at the gala that Jae-hyun's wife was exactly what you'd expect, proper and boring, and clearly past her prime. Zuri received this information over her morning coffee, processed it for approximately 4 seconds, and moved on with her day. Meanwhile, the pressure on Jae-hyun from Se-Rin was intensifying. The merger, a cross-continental deal with a European technology conglomerate that would have made Han Global one of the most significant mid-cap players in the global tech space, was scheduled to close in 11 days. The deal represented the culmination of 3 years of negotiation and, by Jae-hyun's private calculations, a personal net gain of roughly $400 million in equity appreciation. It was the biggest moment of his career. 11 days, Se-Rin said, during a call that Jae-hyun took in his car, parked in the basement level of the tower. 11 days, and then what? More waiting? More after the next thing? Jae-hyun, I've put 2 years into this. 2 years of being patient, being discreet, being everything you said you needed me to be. You owe me a real answer. And you'll have one, he said, after the merger closes. You keep saying that? Her voice, stripped of its practiced softness, was sharper than he was used to. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to be second? To show up at events where your wife is present and smile like I'm a stranger? I was at that gala, Jae-hyun. She looked at me like I was nothing. You're not nothing. Then act like it. 11 days. I want a date for the filing. You'll have it, said. He hung up. He sat in the car for a moment, pressed his fingertips against his eyes, and breathed. Then he straightened his jacket, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, and took the elevator up to his office, where he spent the rest of the day in a series of merger briefings that had, as far as he knew, never been more secure or more ready to execute. He was not aware, at this point, that 3 board members had had private conversations with Zuri in the past week. He was not aware that Adaeze had completed a full legal assessment that confirmed Zuri's authority over 6 specific authorization checkpoints in the merger process. Checkpoints whose significance the merger team had not flagged because no one had thought to audit the underlying company structures with enough care. He was not aware that 2 of the IP filings, central to the merger's valuation, had been reviewed by Zuri's legal team and were now subject to a formal co-ownership revalidation query with the Intellectual Property Registry. He was not aware of any of it because he had built a company with a woman he had fundamentally underestimated, and the scaffolding of that underestimation was now bearing more weight than it could hold. The night before the merger, Zuri sat at her desk until past midnight. She reviewed every document one final time. She called Adaeze, who confirmed that everything was in position. She sent a single message to Kwame that read, "Tomorrow, be present." He replied with a single word, always. Then she closed her laptop, made a cup of chamomile tea, and stood at the window for a long time, looking at the city below. She thought about who she had been when she first stood in front of this view. The woman who had believed in him completely, who had given everything she had to something they were supposed to be building together, who had made herself invisible for years in the belief that love meant you didn't need credit as long as the thing itself flourished. She thought about all the versions of herself she had set aside, the ambitions she had quietly folded away, the opportunities she had declined, the years she had spent standing in someone else's light and calling it a partnership. She thought about the phone call, the soft voice. When will you finally divorce her? She still has use. She breathed in slowly, breathed out. Not yet, she had told herself for 3 weeks. Now, finally, she said. Now. The merger was scheduled to execute at 10 o'clock in the morning. The boardroom on the 41st floor was prepared to a degree that bordered on theatrical, glass-walled, overlooking the city, filled with the kind of elegant tension that accumulated whenever enormous amounts of money were about to change hands. Representatives of the European conglomerate, Meridian Group, were present in person and on screen. Investment bankers, legal counsel, financial advisors. The room hummed with the quiet self-importance of people who believed they were witnessing history. Jae-hyun arrived at 9:45, composed and immaculate in a dark suit, with the energy of a man walking toward the defining moment of his career. He greeted the Meridian delegation, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, radiated confidence. His in-house legal team was arrayed to his left, documents prepared, signatures pages formatted, authorization codes loaded and ready for execution. At 9:58, the digital execution platform loaded on the boardroom screens. At 9:59, the first authorization flag appeared. It was subtle at first, a single red indicator on the structural authorization layer of the primary holding entity. Jae-hyun's legal lead, a young man named Tunde, leaned toward his laptop and frowned. He typed something. The flag remained. He typed again. A second flag appeared on a secondary entity screen. "What is that?" Jae-hyun said quietly. "I'm not sure," Tunde said. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has just discovered that the foundation of a building is not where it was supposed to be. There's a co-authorization requirement flagged on the primary structure. It's saying the execution requires a secondary signatory confirmation. Override it. I'm trying, sir. The system isn't accepting the override. The signatory requirement appears to be embedded at the foundational filing level. It's not an internal system flag. It's a regulatory architecture requirement, murmuring from the Meridian team. Their lead counsel had leaned forward and was looking at the screen with the expression of a person who had just become significantly less comfortable. "What signatory?" Jae-hyun said. His voice was still controlled, but the temperature behind it had changed. Tunde turned to look at him, and in the young man's eyes was the particular dread of someone who had just understood something he very much wished he hadn't. "Mrs. Han," Tunde said. "Zuri, Han." Her authorization is embedded in the foundational co-filing structure of the 3 primary entities. The system requires her electronic signature to authorize the asset transfer component of the merger. Without it, the IP valuation layer can't execute. The room was very quiet. "Get her on the phone," Jae-hyun said. "Sir, get her on the phone now." Tunde dialed. It rang 3 times. It went to voicemail. Jae-hyun took a measured breath. He turned to the Meridian delegation with the composure of a man who had not yet accepted that the ground had opened beneath him. "We may have a brief administrative delay. This is a minor." The boardroom doors opened. Zuri walked in. She was wearing ivory, a structured blazer, tailored trousers, simple and devastating in the way that only absolute confidence can be. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and walked with the unhurried certainty of a person who owns the room they have just entered. She nodded once to the Meridian delegation, graciously, as if she were arriving at an event she had been expecting to attend. She acknowledged two of the board members by name. Then she turned and looked at Jae-hyun. He stared at her. The controlled surface of his composure, so expertly maintained for so many years, had developed a visible fracture. Not panic, not yet, but something close to it. The expression of a man looking at a situation he had drastically, catastrophically miscalculated. "Zuri," he said. Her name, in his mouth, contained a universe of things he couldn't say in this room. "Good morning," she said calmly. "I understand there's an authorization requirement." She sat at the table. She opened her portfolio. She reviewed the documents that Tunda, visibly shaken, slid toward her. She read them with the methodical attention of someone who has read 10,000 documents before and will read 10,000 more, and then she looked up. "Before I authorize," she said, addressing not just Jae-hyun, but the full room, the board, the Meridian team, the legal counsel. "I want the full table to understand the ownership architecture of these structures, as documented in the founding filings. Because I think there has been a long-standing misrepresentation, perhaps unintentional, about who built what." She spoke for 11 minutes. She was precise, factual, and unsparing. She cited document numbers, dates, filing authorities, and registration records. She presented the IP co-ownership findings. She described the financial restructuring she had executed in 2019 without a single trace of self-pity, but with the absolute clarity of someone establishing a legal record. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Jae-hyun except when directly addressing a point that required it. When she finished, the room was silent in the particular way that rooms go silent when the fundamental reality of a situation has just been redrawn in front of everyone present. The lead, counsel for Meridian, cleared her throat. "I think we need a brief recess," she said carefully. "Of course," Zuri said. The room emptied slowly. Board members filed out in quiet clusters. The Meridian team gathered in murmured conversation at the far end. Tunde collected his laptop and left without making eye contact with his employer. Jae-hyun did not move. When the last person had stepped out, leaving only the two of them in the glass-walled room with the city spread out below, he finally looked at her directly. Without the performance, without the calculation, without the practiced surface. Just the raw, unguarded face of a man who had lost something massive and was only now understanding how it happened. "You planned this," he said. Zuri tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question with genuine care. "No," she said. "You planned nothing, so I had to think. There's a difference." "Everything we built, everything I built," she said, and her voice did not rise. Did not crack, did not flinch. "Everything I built, that you allowed the world to believe was only yours, that you allowed yourself to believe was only yours." He was quiet. "I'm going to authorize the merger," she said, "because it's the right business decision, and I will not damage what I spent years building simply to make a point. But the authorization will reflect accurate ownership records, and then I'm going to file for divorce, and then I'm going to leave. Zuri, you told her," she said softly, "that I still had use." She closed her portfolio. "You were right. I still did. I had the use of 12 years of knowledge, every legal structure you failed to properly review, and a mind you never bothered to take seriously." She stood. "The system you trusted was built by me. It would have been kind of you to remember that." She walked to the door. He said her name again, and this time it was not controlled or calculating. It was the sound of a man calling after something already gone. She did not turn around. The merger executed that afternoon. It executed correctly, because Zuri had authorized it correctly, because she had never been the kind of woman who let personal pain become professional sabotage. The documents were signed. The deal was done. And embedded in the terms, duly recorded and legally unassailable, was a revised ownership acknowledgement that correctly attributed co-invention on 14 intellectual property assets and co-foundational authority on 3 primary holding structures to Zuri Han. The divorce filing was submitted the following morning. Jae-hyun's legal team scrambled. They found, as they reviewed every document with the desperation of people who should have reviewed them years ago, that the landscape was not what they had believed it to be. The shares tied to her foundational co-filings, the patents co-owned, the strategic partnership agreements, 2 of the most significant, that bore her name as the originating relationship. The board, which had quietly reconfigured its view of the company's true